Hi everybody, it's Tuesday and it's time for this week's video, and what I'm going to do today is I'm going to make 2 points. One is a point that I wanted to make in the weekend video about the false gospel of fear and judgment, and it's a point that you can make clear to anybody who is using a gospel of judgment. The other thing is I want to give an example, my first example of the law being something about Jesus instead of something about being something that tells you what's right or wrong. So, get ready for what I have to say next. Well, first I want to start off with a point that I wanted to make in this weekend's video on the false gospel of fear and judgment, and I inadvertently left it out. So I was talking about in that example how Jesus said in Matthew that not one jot or one tittle shall pass from the law until all be fulfilled. And just prior to that, he said that he came to fulfill the law and the prophets. Now, he said all be fulfilled. So I pointed out that Paul said that the law was abolished, so the whole law was gone. Now, you cannot get rid of just bits and pieces of the law. You can't get rid of the sacrifice laws without getting rid of the murder laws and everything else. So, because the law was completely put together, where if you violated one, you basically were guilty of violating all 613. So, but the point that he was making is all had to be fulfilled. That also means that all prophecy had to be fulfilled, and prophecy worked the same way. You couldn't fulfill a prophecy here and a prophecy there. All of prophecy had to be fulfilled. He came to fulfill both, he said too. So he came to fulfill the law and the prophets. Now, where I find this useful, even for somebody who doesn't care about the gospel or care about Jesus or anything else, or religion or God or anything else, this is fine. But it's also useful if somebody's trying to tell you that God is going to judge you, or that God is judging your country, or that God is going to come and in a fiery wrath and judge the world. This cannot be true, because the same people who are saying that are not practicing any part of the law. They will tell you there's no need to sacrifice bulls, goats, lambs, and turtle doves and everything else anymore. They say that is old, that is past. They are not sticking to the dietary laws. Why? Because they say those are no longer in effect. Well, if one's not in effect, all of them are all of them are not in effect. You see, because I know it sounds crazy, and it is crazy, but if you walk your dog on the Sabbath, you're guilty of breaking every law, including murder and dishonoring your mother and your father, and stealing and bearing false witness. You're guilty of every one of them, and all the rest as well. It's crazy, but that's the genius of God's law. There was a method to God's madness. Here's another one. Okay, here's an example, and this is not an example of right or wrong, like a lot of religious people would like to think that God's law was given for. But according to Deuteronomy, it says that thou shalt not wear clothing from diverse cloths, such as wool and linen, such as of wool and of linen. And so if you did wear some a wool sweater with linen pants, you were guilty of violating all the commandments. You were guilty of murder. But there was a method to the madness, and here's what it is. And here's what I see what it is. Because remember, Jesus also said that the scriptures, the law, the Psalms, and the prophets, he said this in Luke chapter 24, that the law, the Psalms, and the prophets, they are they that speak of me. So the law was speaking of him. The law was not speaking of good and evil, right and wrong. It was never given for that intent. It was given to point to a Redeemer. It was given to point to Jesus. It was given to tell you something about Jesus. And with Jesus, we know you cannot mix a couple things together. Because of what Jesus did at the cross, you cannot mix law and grace. You cannot mix his blood with the blood of bulls and goats. You cannot mix old covenant with new covenant. They cannot exist in the same space of time together. One has to go for the other one to come in. Just like two pieces of clothing cannot be worn on the same body together. This is the example. Once the old covenant is fulfilled, it is not in effect anymore, and the new covenant is. You cannot wear both of those garments, because you're going to defile both of them by wearing them. The new covenant will defile the old one, and the old one will defile the new one. There was definitely a method to God's madness. The old is old, praise the Lord. And the new covenant is the new covenant, full of grace and peace, no judgment, no fear, just freedom. All right, folks, have a good week.